to be somewhere, mindful, present, and attentive? There's no right answer to that kind of question, only instances, moments experienced by individuals. So I kind of want to go through a few of these and see if we can distill something about presence. These woods in southern Massachusetts are the site of one of our research projects, so I've spent a good bit of time there. It's the kind of place where it's just awesome to be connected to all the things that are going around you, where there's much more going on than you could ever take in. Here's another place where we often find ourselves. Actually, some of you may be in this place right now, or will be at some point during the talk. These students are somewhere in between their immediate surroundings and a world that's visible to them through a small glass window that they can hold in their hands. And here's a third way that we can be somewhere. This guy is wearing this thing called the Oculus Rift. It's a head-mounted virtual reality display. So when he looks up at the sky, he's actually seeing a sky rendered in a virtual world. So we can't really conclude much about where he is, except to say that he's somewhere besides where he's been photographed. So how do we know where we are? How do we sense our environments? This lovely fellow is called the sensory homunculus. He's a visualization of the relative proportions of our different parts of our sensory systems in our brains. So take the hands, for example. They're really dexterous, they've got a lot of sensitivity, and so they're represented pretty substantially in terms of brain real estate, and they're exaggerated here to reflect that. But there are other surprising or interesting features of the homunculus that are really prominent as well, like the tongue. And the homunculus does a decent job of maybe approximating the contours of our senses, but it's more of a snapshot than a definition. We're shaped by the world we live in and the things we do. So, for example, I've studied music, and so I'd expect my ear training to have had an effect on my brain. I should have more cortical activity and auditory cortex, and then I should have bigger ears in my homunculus. So if we go back to those students for a moment and think about where they are and how that world shapes them. Let's meet the smartphone homunculus. So he's got this one huge eyeball with which he looks at two-dimensional flat displays. No need for stereo vision in a two-dimensional world. And he drags this big finger along flat glass surfaces to interact with those displays. He's got a few other fingers too for the cool multi-touch apps, but come on, most of us just use that one finger. And he's got those little ears with which he can kind of get auditory cues, sometimes turn-by-turn directions. And he likes music, so he listens to music. And this is the full extent of our interaction with most of our devices. What they do is they tend to compress the entire world of information into a small display, forcing us to decompress it again with an incredibly limited subset of our sensory motor capabilities. At the same time, the data on the left-hand side in that world is getting bigger and more unmanageable. There's the kind of stuff that we all know about, like how since I started the talk, it's that 300 hours of video have gone up to YouTube and nearly 2 million tweets to Twitter. But then there's all the other stuff that we don't think about as much, all that sensor data, all of your phones streaming their locations, motion, things even like barometric pressure that they're measuring constantly and streaming to the cloud. So while our information about the world is getting richer in a way, we're finding ourselves less and less able to be present in it. In my research group at the MIT Media Lab, one of the things we do is look for ways we might bypass this bottleneck to bring that kind of information into contact with our bodies, with the homunculus, in new ways. I'd like to show you a few examples of how we've thought about that. And the first thing we did was we wanted to characterize what is the data produced by a modern building, in this case, our own. So what you see here is a visualization of the Media Lab, and everything within this visualization is real-time sensor data that's being produced in the building. So we can see the temperature in every room. Right now, we're moving through this cloud of humidity sensors that are in our atrium space. We can even hear audio from the building, although you'll never understand intelligible speech. Scramble. And we can see where people move and where they gather from motion sensors and from RFID, those kinds of cards you carry around probably at the uni and at work. So we can see the people appearing. We can go back in time here to a conference where we see people gathering. We see where they flowed through the building throughout the conference. And even what they were saying there on social media, that's all that little text that's kind of popping up. We can see people playing table tennis in the atrium, because the table's got the sensors in it. And the overall statistics for how the Media Lab does at table tennis. And here, at 1,200 times real time, we can actually see the whole lab transition from night to day. So all the building systems coming online, people coming inside, interacting with each other, and the kind of ecology overall of the building. And so this is a very top-down, kind of macroscopic way to look at all this data. And it's a way that we can better understand what the data is, what's available these days. But what if you wanted to pick one of those layers out, one of those pieces of data, and experience it in a more sensory way? For example, if you wanted to be able to feel where people are gathered in the building. So for decades, researchers have been working in this space called sensory substitution in assistive technologies, where you could take an input from one sensory modality, say visual, and map it to another, like tactile. And so this has been used with incredible success in giving blind people or blinded people an ability to, in a way, see through touch. If you recall from the homunculus, the tongue is known to have this incredibly high sensing resolution and also this high degree of what's called neuroplasticity, the ability to adapt and integrate new forms of signals. So in this project, we borrowed this idea from assistive technology that's pretty radical to see how we might be able to make digital information more sensory, more prosthetic.
In a simple demo application, a user identifies the specific pixels and lines drawn by a colleague.
What you see here is my colleague is clicking on the screen.
We seek to move beyond traditional vision replacement and towards broadly accessible sensory augmentation.
I'm finding myself pulled through this environment now by the animation you see in the top inset there.
Can provide a user with an internal sense of direction, like a migratory bird. We're also developing mappings to electric field sensing of others in the environment, and imagining links to distributed sensor networks.
So the idea here is really that over time, that sensation on the tongue starts to go away. It starts to fade into the background, and the information feels prosthetic, and that's really a different experience of data, right? Where we're not interpreting it anymore, but we're feeling it. So we've seen some data from an urban environment, and I want to take you now back outside to those woods I showed you just at the start. These woods and the surrounding 600 acres are the site of a major wetland restoration and conservation project in southern Massachusetts, one that's being documented by hundreds of sensors in the trees, under the soil, and in the water. And we're installing these sensors as a way of better understanding ecological processes that are resulting from this restoration, but also as a way of giving visitors and the ecologists we're working with a new approach to experiencing these forms of data. So take, for example, the trees. Did you know that trees grow and shrink on a daily basis as they take in and release water? Well, we'll be measuring that, and soon you'll be able to experience it as it occurs. So when you wear our headset and look out across this pond, you'll be able to hear sound from microphones that are distributed on the other side, hanging in the goose's nest in that little island. As you look down into the water, you'll start to hear the sound from just below of turtles swimming about. And this is a kind of a sensory superpower, an ability to extend your audition beyond where you could before, across distances and into environments that you could never go before. And it's one that's not mediated by an app on your phone, but by where you're looking and what you're attending to. Okay, so we've seen some data from an urban environment and some data from an outdoor environment, and a few ways that those are changing our relationship to our surroundings. I'd like to show you now a project, the last project I'll show, that bridges those two environments, the marsh and the city, through an element that they share, which is a tree. My colleague Edwina Portocarrero and I developed this system we call the Listen Tree, where we bury these things called exciter transducers under the ground, hidden in the soil, and they excite the tree with vibration so that when a person is walking by, they can lean their head against the tree and they'll actually hear sound through bone conduction. The sound transmits through the wood, through all the branches, through the skull into the inner ear. This is the reason that your voice sounds better to you when you're speaking than when you hear yourself recorded, which I'll soon find out myself. And so in its present form, the Listen Tree is streaming live sound from the marsh to our campus at MIT. So sound of these geese squawking and frogs and turtles and all of this stuff is punctuating this background of thunderstorms and all of this the kind of sound that could be of our environment at MIT in the urban kind of landscape, but really isn't. It creates this eerie telepresence that draws people in, and you see often people coming in groups and each taking a branch to their ear to listen. This is a form of display that doesn't demand your attention, it invites it. And it points to a future where the digital information that we consume might one day become enmeshed in the material of the world. So the anthropologist Jonathan Crary starts his book with a big idea. He writes, "The ways in which we intently look at, listen to, or concentrate on anything have a deeply historical character." He goes on to talk about attention, that we should define ourselves in terms of our capacity to pay attention, of attention as a currency that can be divided or split or loaned or paid on credit. That is a product of our time. So what will these new forms of data do to change the way we relate to our environment? Well, I don't think we'll be stuck too long in this particular smartphone bottleneck. There will be new technologies that will reshape our perception. I'm hoping for a future where digital information doesn't have to stand between us and our surroundings, but might one day really connect us to our surroundings more deeply. Thanks.